Every name has a story, and behind every story is a human life. This video is about two names that deserves to be remembered. Today we're talking about Amanda Colley, a woman whose life was cut short on a summer morning in Florida, and Lindy Dobbins, her friend, who died trying to help her. This is a story about domestic violence, about the moments when everything falls apart, and about the legal battle that followed. It's a story that matters because it shows us how quickly love can turn to violence, and how the justice system responds when the worst happens. If you're interested in true crime, criminal justice, or understanding the human stories behind the headlines, this video is for you. Amanda Colley was living in St. Augustine, Florida, in the summer of 2015. She had been married to James Terry Colley Jr., but their marriage had fallen apart. By August, they were separated. Amanda had taken out a domestic violence injunction against him, which meant he wasn't supposed to come near her. She was living in what used to be their home, trying to rebuild her life. James was staying with his sister about 15 miles away. He had a new girlfriend, but he still wanted Amanda back. He suspected she had moved on, that she was seeing someone else, and that suspicion ate at him. On the morning of August 27, 2015, around 4 in the morning, James drove to Amanda's house. She wasn't home. He let himself in and started searching through her things. He found what he was looking for, evidence that confirmed his worst fears. Men's clothing that wasn't his. Items that told him Amanda had indeed moved on. The discovery sent him into a rage. He tore through the house, smashing televisions, dumping trash everywhere, destroying what had once been their shared space. Then he left. When Amanda came home around 9 that morning, she found the destruction. She called her boyfriend, Lamar Doberly, and two of her friends, Lindy Dobbins and Rachel Hendricks, to come help her deal with the mess. Lamar called the police non-emergency line. An officer came, looked at the damage, but Amanda said she didn't want to file formal charges yet. She wanted to talk to her mother and her attorney first, so the officer left. Amanda, Lamar, Lindy, and Rachel stayed at the house, trying to clean up and make sense of what had happened. Meanwhile, James had his own appointment that morning. He had to appear in court for violating the domestic violence injunction Amanda had against him. There's video footage of that court hearing, and it shows something chilling. James appeared completely calm and cooperative. He answered the judge's questions clearly. He denied being under the influence of anything. He asked intelligent questions about his probation and court fees. The judge accepted his plea of no contest. James walked out of that courthouse looking like a man who had his life together, but that was about to change. After leaving the courthouse, James started calling Amanda over and over. Most of the calls went unanswered. Finally, at 9:41 in the morning, Amanda picked up. They talked for about 14 minutes. Nobody knows exactly what was said in that conversation, but what happened next tells us everything we need to know about James's state of mind. He didn't go home. He didn't try to calm down. Instead, he drove to a gas station near his sister's house, then went to his sister's home. The evidence suggests he picked up guns and ammunition there. Then he bought a small amount of gas and started the 20-minute drive to Amanda's house. But James didn't drive straight to the front door. He drove to an adjacent street and parked at an empty house. He walked along a trail that ran behind Amanda's property. He approached from the back, armed with two handguns, a 9mm and a .45 caliber. Inside the house were 4 people: Amanda, Lindy, Rachel, and Lamar. They had no idea what was about to happen. James started shooting from outside the house, shattering the back glass doors. He was shouting, asking where he was, meaning Lamar. Lamar heard the gunshots and yelled for everyone to run. He managed to escape through the garage, but the 3 women ran to the master bedroom. Amanda hid in the bathroom. Lindy and Rachel barricaded themselves in a closet. Both Amanda and Lindy called 911. Those calls recorded everything that happened next, including the sound of gunshots and the voices of everyone involved. James came into the house through the shattered back door. He found Amanda first. He screamed at her, demanding to know where Lamar was. Amanda begged him to put down the gun. She told him she didn't know where Lamar was. James then tried to get into the closet where Lindy and Rachel were hiding. Rachel held the door shut with her foot. Amanda, crying, told James that only Lindy and Rachel were in the closet. Lindy called out, confirming it was her. But James wasn't satisfied. He went back to Amanda and shot her, but not fatally. Then he returned to the closet. This time, when he couldn't get the door open, James fired a shot through it. The bullet grazed Rachel's arm, and she lost her grip on the door. As Rachel ran out of the closet and escaped from the house, James walked in. Lindy was crouched behind a chest, trying to hide. James shot and killed her. Then he went back to the bathroom where Amanda was. He shot her 3 more times with the 9mm until it ran out of bullets. Then he pulled out the .45 caliber and shot her 5 more times. Amanda suffered 9 gunshot wounds total. The medical examiner would later testify that she was aware of what was happening to her throughout the entire ordeal. After killing both women, James left the house, went back to his sister's place, abandoned his cell phone, and fled the state. Police arrested him hours later in Virginia after a traffic stop. The whole thing, from the first shot to the last, took only minutes, but those minutes destroyed multiple lives and families forever. At trial, James's defense team didn't try to argue he wasn't the shooter. The evidence was overwhelming. Instead, they argued that he had been impaired at the time of the murders. They claimed he had taken Ambien, a sleep medication, early that morning and was experiencing something called parasomnia, a sleep disorder where someone appears to be acting rationally but later has no memory of their actions. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about this condition. They presented evidence that James had been drinking and using cocaine the night before. They tried to paint a picture of a man who wasn't in control of his actions, but the prosecution had their own evidence. They had that video from the courthouse showing James calm and coherent just an hour before the murders. They had the judge from that hearing testify that James showed no signs of impairment. They had cell phone records and surveillance footage showing James's deliberate actions, driving to his sister's house to get weapons, buying gas, parking away from Amanda's house, and approaching on foot from behind. They had the 911 recordings that captured James's voice, his words, his actions. And they had the testimony of Rachel Hendricks, who survived and could tell the jury exactly what happened. The jury found James guilty on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder for Amanda and Lindy, attempted first-degree murder of Lamar, attempted felony murder of Rachel, burglary with assault or battery, burglary of a dwelling, and aggravated stalking after an injunction. Then came the penalty phase, where the jury had to decide whether James should receive the death penalty or life in prison. During the penalty phase, the defense presented more evidence about James's background. They brought in family members who testified that he had been a good father, a hard worker, a volunteer coach for kids' sports teams. They talked about his struggles with alcohol and depression. They presented 8 lay witnesses and 3 expert witnesses, all trying to show that James had some redeeming qualities, that there were reasons to spare his life. At the Spencer hearing, where defendants can make a statement before sentencing, James said, "This was a horrible, terrible accident, and I wish it was different, but it's not, and I'm sorry for all parties involved." But the prosecution presented the facts of the crime itself. The jury heard about how Amanda and Lindy died. They heard that Amanda suffered multiple defensive wounds, showing she tried to protect herself. They heard that she was shot while standing and while on the ground, that she knew what was happening to her. They heard that Lindy was executed while hiding behind a chest in a closet. They heard about the terror Rachel experienced and the trauma Lamar would carry forever. The medical examiner testified in detail about the wounds, the trajectories of the bullets, the suffering both women endured. The jury found 5 aggravating factors for Amanda's murder and 4 for Lindy's. They found that James had been previously convicted of violent felonies, the other crimes he committed that same day. They found he committed the murders during a burglary. They found the murders were especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. They found he acted in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner. And for Amanda specifically, they found he committed murder while subject to a domestic violence injunction against the very person who obtained that injunction. The jury unanimously recommended death, 12-0 for both murders. The judge agreed. He found 23 mitigating circumstances, acknowledging James's otherwise crime-free life, his good character in the community, his role as a father, his struggles with substance abuse and depression, but he concluded that the aggravating factors far outweighed the mitigating circumstances. James Terry Colley Jr. was sentenced to death for both murders, plus life sentences for the other crimes. James appealed, arguing, among other things, that the aggravating factor about the murders being especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel was misapplied. He argued that Florida's death penalty system didn't sufficiently narrow who could receive death sentences. The Florida Supreme Court rejected all his arguments and affirmed his convictions and sentences in 2020. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear his case in 2021. Then came the post-conviction proceedings, where James raised 11 new claims, all arguing that his trial lawyers had been ineffective. He claimed they shouldn't have conceded he was guilty of second-degree murder when he only wanted to concede manslaughter. He claimed they failed to prepare him to testify in his own defense. He claimed they didn't adequately challenge certain witnesses or investigate certain evidence. He claimed they failed to present important mitigating evidence about trauma he experienced as a child. He even claimed they should have had genetic testing done to show he was predisposed to bad reactions from one of his medications. The post-conviction court held an evidentiary hearing and heard testimony from James, his trial lawyers, and various experts. In December 2025, the Florida Supreme Court affirmed the denial of all his post-conviction claims. The court found that his trial lawyers made reasonable strategic decisions, that they weren't deficient in their performance, and that even if they had done some things differently, there was no reasonable probability the outcome would have changed. The court noted that the evidence of James's guilt was overwhelming, that the aggravating factors were substantial, and that the mitigating evidence, even with everything James claimed should have been presented, was relatively minor in comparison. One of the most controversial aspects of the case involved a judge testifying at trial. Judge Tinlin, who had presided over James's injunction violation hearing the morning of the murders, testified for the prosecution during the penalty phase. He told the jury that James had appeared completely normal and unimpaired during that hearing. James argued this was prejudicial, that having a judge testify against him gave unfair weight to that testimony. But the courts found that Judge Tinlin was simply testifying as a fact witness about what he personally observed, and that his testimony was relevant to rebut the defense claim that James was impaired. Even Justice Labarga, who wrote a partial dissent, agreed that while it might have been better for the prosecution to use a different witness, the testimony itself wasn't improper enough to warrant relief. This case raises difficult questions about domestic violence, about the warning signs we miss or ignore, about the systems meant to protect victims. Amanda had a domestic violence injunction against James. She had taken legal steps to protect herself, but that piece of paper couldn't stop him when he decided to act. The injunction actually became one of the aggravating factors that helped send him to death row, but it didn't save Amanda's life. Lindy Dobbins was simply a friend who came to help clean up a mess. She had nothing to do with James and Amanda's relationship. She died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because she was a good friend who showed up when Amanda needed help. The legal documents in this case span hundreds of pages. They contain detailed descriptions of the crime scene, the autopsies, the evidence, the testimony, the legal arguments. But at the center of all those pages are two women who died terribly, and the families left behind to grieve. Amanda's family lost a daughter, a mother, a sister. Lindy's family lost someone they loved. Rachel Hendricks survived, but will carry the trauma of that day forever. Lamar Duberly escaped, but lost someone he cared about and witnessed the aftermath of violence. And James's own family, his children, his sisters, his parents, they lost him too, in a different way. As of now, James Terry Colley Jr. remains on death row in Florida. His appeals have been exhausted at the state level. He could potentially file federal habeas corpus petitions, But based on the strength of the evidence against him and the court's consistent rejection of his claims, it's unlikely those will succeed. The question now is not whether he will be executed, but when. Florida has resumed executions in recent years after a period of uncertainty about its death penalty procedures. James is one of more than 300 people on death row in Florida, waiting for their cases to move through the final stages of the appeals process. This case is a reminder that domestic violence doesn't always end when a relationship ends. Sometimes it escalates. Sometimes the most dangerous time for a victim is when they try to leave, when they start to move on with their lives. Amanda was doing everything right. She had left James. She had legal protection. She was building a new life. But none of that was enough to stop him. The statistics tell us that a significant percentage of women who are murdered are killed by current or former intimate partners. Amanda became one of those statistics. Lindy became collateral damage in someone else's relationship violence. It's also a reminder about the role of the criminal justice system in these cases. The death penalty is reserved for the most aggravated murders, and this case certainly qualified. The deliberate planning, the violation of the protective order, the execution-style killing of Lindy, the multiple shots fired at Amanda while she was defenseless, the terror inflicted on all the victims. These factors made this more than just a crime of passion. The courts found that James acted with cold calculation, that he knew what he was doing, and that his actions warranted the ultimate punishment. But the case also shows the complexity of these proceedings. James's lawyers presented evidence of his good character, his mental health struggles, his substance abuse, his lack of prior violent criminal history. They tried to show that he was more than just the worst thing he ever did. The courts acknowledged all of that mitigation. They found 23 separate mitigating circumstances, but they still concluded that the aggravating factors outweighed everything else. That's how the system is supposed to work, weighing everything, considering the whole person, but ultimately holding people accountable for their actions. The names Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins deserve to be remembered not just as victims in a criminal case, but as people who had lives, families, friends, futures that were stolen from them. Amanda was someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's friend. Lindy was a person who showed up to help a friend in need. They both died because one man couldn't accept that his marriage was over, couldn't control his rage, couldn't see past his own pain to recognize the humanity of the people around him. Their deaths weren't accidents. They were choices James made, step by step, decision by decision, from the moment he drove to Amanda's house in the early morning hours to the moment he pulled the trigger for the last time. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and be kind to each other.